The quiet turn of a key at midnight promised sanctuary, but instead I walked into an ambush set by my own brother-in-law, surrounded by strangers and the lingering smell of a cover-up. Now, bleeding in a dark alley, I'm realizing this isn't a housing crisis. It's a high-stakes internal security operation, and I'm the only loose end they need to tie off. The key turned in the lock with a familiar grating sound that always sounded a little too loud in the dead quiet of our hallway. It was 11 p.m., and I was exhausted. Another 12-hour shift at the data center, fueled by stale coffee and the desperate hope that tomorrow would be less soul-crushing. I pushed the door open, ready for the sanctuary of my small, slightly cramped but entirely mine apartment, the one I'd saved for 5 brutal years to afford the down payment on. The air inside hit me first. It wasn't just stuffy. It was thick, humid, and smelled overwhelmingly of cheap instant ramen and something vaguely floral, like an air freshener trying desperately to cover up a swamp. "Honey, I'm home," I called out, dropping my heavy work bag by the door. Usually, my wife, Clara, would already be curled up on the sofa, maybe watching some trashy reality TV. Tonight, the TV was on, but the sound was muted, showing a cartoon playing on loop. And the sofa wasn't empty. 3 people were crammed onto the 2-seater. There was Clara, looking pale and utterly defeated. Next to her, not just sitting, but sprawled, was my brother-in-law, Mark. Mark is what you might generously call a project. He's perpetually between jobs, perpetually optimistic about his next big idea, usually involving cryptocurrency or artisanal pickled goods, and perpetually broke. And then there was the small, slightly bewildered-looking woman sitting on the very edge of the cushion, holding a fidget spinner. I didn't recognize her. "Surprise?" Clara offered weakly, a forced smile plastered on her face that didn't reach her eyes. I blinked, trying to process the sudden, seismic shift in my domestic landscape. My apartment is 550 square feet. It's efficient. It's cozy for 2 adults. It is not, by any stretch of the imagination, a communal living arrangement. "Mark, what is going on, and who is—" I gestured vaguely at the third person, who was now staring intently at my reflection in the dark TV screen. Mark finally uncurled himself, managing to look both apologetic and deeply entitled all at once. He stood up, towering over me at 6'4", and clapped me heartily on the shoulder, a gesture that made me instinctively stiffen. "Hey, buddy, glad you're finally home. Listen, we've got a slight situation, a necessary, temporary adjustment." He paused, waiting for me to ask what the situation was, but I just stood there, rooted to the spot, my mind cycling through every worst-case scenario, from burst pipes to Mark having accidentally joined a cult. Clara finally jumped in, her voice tight. "The rental company, they illegally evicted us this morning. They gave us 3 hours' notice. Apparently, the new owners are tearing the building down for luxury condos starting next week." I stared at her. "Evicted? Why didn't you call me? I would have driven straight over." "We tried, honey, but your phone went straight to voicemail until just now. Anyway, the point is, we had nowhere to go. Mark's lease was up yesterday, and his storage unit lease expired today. And this," she gestured to the stranger, who was now quietly unwrapping a granola bar, "is his fiancée, Sarah. They're getting married next month, apparently, and her parents just kicked her out of their house because they didn't approve of Mark." The air pressure in the tiny living room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. 3 adults, one of whom I had never met, were now sharing the only functional living space I had managed to claw my way into. "Mark," I said, my voice dangerously level, "how long is this temporary adjustment?" Mark grinned, a picture of false reassurance. "Oh, just a few weeks, until we get our deposit back from the old place, figure out financing for a tiny house. We're being super minimalist. Sarah and I can take the sofa bed. You and Clara get the bedroom, right?" The sofa bed. The one that squeaks if a dust bunny rolls over it too aggressively. "Wait," I said, my exhaustion finally morphing into a hard, cold knot of panic. "Tiny house financing? Mark, you told me last month you were working freelance coding gigs. Where is the money coming from for this?" Mark averted his eyes, fiddling with a loose thread on his stained hoodie. "That fell through. But Sarah's family has connections. High-level connections. We're liquidating some assets right now. It's a massive influx of cash coming in next week, I swear. We just need a launch pad. I glanced around the room again. There were now 3 duffel bags piled next to the entertainment center, 2 boxes of Sarah's belongings stacked precariously near the radiator, and Mark was using my favorite reading lamp as a charging station for his 2 ancient cell phones. This wasn't a launch pad. It was a siege. "Clara, talk to me," I pleaded, looking to my wife for some sign of a backup plan. She wrung her hands. I know, it's awful, but Mark had nowhere else to go, and Sarah was literally sleeping in her car last night, Alex. We couldn't leave them out there. We just need to hold on until they sort out their immediate paperwork." The immediate paperwork. Right. The same paperwork that usually involves paperwork being filed with people who operate outside the purview of normal banking institutions. I suddenly felt a chill that had nothing to do with the lack of air conditioning. "Okay," I sighed, running a hand over my face. "We need rules. Absolutely no noise before 7 a.m. No cooking elaborate meals. And Mark, you are not touching my server closet. That's for work backup only." Mark nodded vigorously, maybe a little too enthusiastically. "Agreed. You're the best, Alex. Tonight, we're just crashing. We'll figure out the logistics tomorrow." I managed to eat my emergency leftovers standing over the sink, watching the trio settle in. Mark was already snoring, taking up most of the sofa bed, which was still technically in sofa configuration. Sarah was asleep upright, her head leaning against his shoulder. Clara looked at me with weary apologies before quietly slipping into our bedroom. I walked into the living room, intending to just grab a glass of water, when I noticed something tucked under Mark's duffel bag, something heavy that didn't look like a laptop charger. It was a thick, black nylon pouch, the kind used for securing valuable equipment during transport. It was partially unzipped. Curiosity, the kind born of sudden, deep suspicion, got the better of me. I knelt down, pretending to tie my shoe, and flicked the zipper open just a fraction. Inside, nestled in protective foam cutouts, weren't artisanal pickled goods or crypto hardware. There were several thick bundles of what looked like foreign currency, bundled with plain white rubber bands, and next to them there was a rectangular object wrapped carefully in dark cloth. I pulled at the cloth just enough to see the dull sheen of polished metal, too long and oddly shaped to be any tool I recognized. It was clearly some form of heavy, non-standard equipment. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't a temporary housing crisis. This was something else entirely. I quickly zipped the pouch shut, stood up, and backed away slowly, trying to regulate my breathing. They weren't just broke. They were hiding something big, something dangerous. I walked into our tiny bedroom, the door clicking shut behind me with terrifying finality. Clara was already asleep, or pretending to be. I stood there, listening to the sounds filtering from the main room, the heavy rhythmic snoring of my brother-in-law, the gentle rhythmic hum of the silent TV loop, and the faint sound of a low, distorted voice whispering into a phone, muffled but clearly audible through the thin walls. It was Mark. He wasn't talking about financing. "The exchange is set for dawn," the voice hissed, strained and urgent. "No slip-ups. The package has to be secured before the internal security sweep begins." I told them I had eyes on the target location. This little apartment complex is perfect cover. They think I'm just a couch surfer. If the authorities move in, if that service finds out about the assets, we lose everything. I need confirmation the perimeter is clear by 0400 hours, or the entire operation goes sideways, and I'll be facing some very serious consequences. My breath hitched. Operation? Assets? Perimeter? This wasn't just a matter of bad rent. This smelled like something the agents of the Sluzhba Vnutrini Bezopasnosti would be deeply interested in, the kind of trouble that earns you more than just eviction notices. I looked at Clara's sleeping form, then back at the door, where the faint whisper continued. If Mark was planning some kind of high-stakes rendezvous, right here, in the apartment complex I legally rented, I was an unknowing accessory. And if the authorities were mentioned, what exactly was Mark hiding that required securing a package before a sweep? I knew I had maybe 4 hours until dawn, until the 0400 confirmation call, until whatever this clandestine operation was set to happen. I had to know what was in that black pouch, and more importantly, I had to know if my small, safe home was about to become the center of a very, very bad investigation. I silently reached for the door handle, preparing to face the music, when I heard Mark's voice shift again, colder now, predatory. The wife, Clara? She's totally disposable, boss. She doesn't know a thing. But if she wakes up and starts asking questions, well, we'll have to handle that too. My hand froze on the cool brass of the doorknob. Disposable. The word echoed in the suffocating silence of the bedroom, instantly incinerating any lingering sentimentality I had for my wife's hapless brother. He hadn't just invited himself over. He had brought a dangerous liability into our lives, and now he was casually writing my wife, his own sister, off as collateral damage. I retreated instantly, pulling my hand back as if the metal had burned me. I couldn't risk making a sound. If Mark was on a secure line, even a slight creak of the floorboards could alert him. I slid onto the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb Clara, whose breathing remained steady, mercifully deep in sleep, or perhaps too exhausted to wake. I desperately needed information. I needed proof of what Mark was involved in, and I needed to know what that package was. Quietly, painstakingly, I reached for my phone on the nightstand. My fingers trembled as I navigated to the internet browser. I typed in Mark's full name and the phrase I'd overheard: high-level connections. The initial results were the usual dead ends: expired domain names, a few vague LinkedIn profiles listing him as an independent consultant, and a plethora of targeted ads for payday loans. Then, buried 3 pages deep in a dark forum dedicated to international finance tracking, a place I only found because I'd used specific non-standard search terms, I hit pay dirt. It wasn't about crypto or artisanal goods. It was about shell corporations, regulatory avoidance, and what looked like the systematic siphoning of funds from a recently collapsed South American development bank. The article, written in dense financial jargon, mentioned several key individuals who had recently vanished, along with significant liquid assets. One name flashed on the screen that made my stomach clench: MRK, primary facilitator, Mark R. Kellen. He wasn't just broke, he was a fugitive, or at least an accessory to massive financial malfeasance. The foreign currency in the pouch wasn't souvenir money. It was likely laundered capital. And the package he was securing before the sweep? That was the real danger. I minimized the screen just as I heard a floorboard groan in the living room. Mark had gotten up. Panic seized me. If he was moving now, I had seconds. I checked the room. The only way out was through the living room, past the sofa bed where he was currently camped. My gaze snapped to the window. We were on the 3rd floor. Not ideal for a hasty exit, but survivable if I could get to the fire escape from the narrow balcony. I heard the light scrape of the pouch being unzipped again. He was clearly moving the contents. I had to act. I couldn't leave Clara here, exposed, if Mark was truly unstable or working for dangerous people. I leaned over Clara and gently shook her shoulder. "Clara, wake up, now. We have to leave." Her eyes fluttered open, clouded with sleep and confusion. "Alex? What is it?" "Mark is not our friend. He's involved in something serious. I need you to get dressed. Silent. Grab your passport and the emergency cash box from under the sink. Go to the fire escape window. Don't ask questions. Just move." She started to sit up, the remnants of sleep dissolving into genuine alarm as she registered the fear in my voice. "What did you hear?" "He called someone disposable," I whispered fiercely. "Hurry." That galvanized her. She shot out of bed, moving with surprising speed for someone so sleep-deprived. As she was pulling on her jeans, I slipped out of the bedroom door, keeping low against the wall. The living room was illuminated only by the faint blue glow of the muted television screen. Mark wasn't by the sofa bed anymore. He was standing by the entrance to the tiny kitchen nook, his back to me. He had the black pouch open on the counter. The rectangular object was fully visible now. It wasn't a tool or a laptop. It was a specialized encryption device, heavy and military-grade looking, covered in blinking green LEDs. He was talking into one of the burner phones, his voice a low, intense murmur that vibrated with stress. "Yes, the location is secure. The contents are prepped for transfer. I have the drive disconnected from the primary network. It's isolated now, ready for handoff. Just confirm the extraction point coordinates. Tell Ramirez to move in fast. The locals are not to be involved." As he spoke the word locals, his eyes flicked toward the bedroom door, my direction. He hadn't seen me, but he sensed something. I needed a diversion. My gaze landed on the one thing in the room that offered instant, loud chaos, the main circuit breaker panel, tucked into the dark corner near the coat rack. Moving faster than I thought possible, I lunged across the carpeted floor, slamming my palm against the rusted metal door of the breaker box and yanking it open. Then, with a desperate shove, I flipped the main switch down. Click. Silence. The TV died. The room plunged into absolute, inky blackness. "What the?" Mark yelled, his voice sharp with alarm. This was my cue. I heard Clara fumbling behind me near the balcony door. I took 2 quick steps towards the kitchen counter where the pouch lay. I didn't need the encryption drive. I needed the paper trail. I blindly swept my hand across the counter, hoping to grab any loose documents. My fingers brushed against the cold metal of the burner phone he'd been using, then the slick surface of the black pouch. I managed to snag a thin, folded sheet of paper that had been tucked under the pouch itself. As I grabbed the paper, Mark reacted with shocking speed. He wasn't just a financier, he was trained. I heard a grunt, a heavy shoe scuffing the floor, and then a searing pain erupted across my side as something hard, probably the heavy encryption device, slammed into my ribs. I gasped, stumbling back against the wall, clutching the paper in one hand and trying to suck air into my lungs. "You shouldn't have done that, Alex," Mark snarled, his voice dangerously close, amplified by the darkness. "You don't know what you've interfered with." I couldn't speak, just wheezed. I heard him move toward the bedroom, presumably to stop Clara. I forced myself to push off the wall, ignoring the blinding pain. I had the paper. I had to see what it was. I stumbled toward the faint exterior light filtering from the balcony door, realizing Clara was already outside. I managed to wrench the door open and burst onto the tiny metal grating of the fire escape landing, coughing violently. "Clara, wait!" Below us, I heard the distant but unmistakable sound of a car engine idling unusually low on the street, followed by the crunch of tires stopping suddenly on gravel. Someone else was here. Mark shoved through the balcony door right behind me, his silhouette framed against the dim interior light. He saw me holding the paper, and his face contorted in pure, panicked rage. "Give me that! That's the key!" he roared, lunging forward with both hands outstretched. I instinctively held the thin piece of paper up, away from his grasp, but in doing so, I lost my footing on the slick metal grating. My center of gravity shifted violently outward. I scrambled desperately for purchase on the railing, my fingers slipping on the cold, damp metal. The world tipped sideways. I didn't fall onto the landing. I fell off it. My momentum carried me backward, away from the building, and I plunged 3 stories toward the unforgiving concrete alley below, the crumpled sheet of paper still clutched so tightly in my fist that the edges dug into my palm. The last thing I saw before the darkness of the fall engulfed me was Mark's horrified face leaning over the railing, illuminated by the sudden, flashing blue and red lights that had just rounded the corner onto our quiet street. The impact was not the single terminal crunch I had mentally prepared for. Instead, it was a sickening symphony of bone, scraped metal, and immediate, blinding white pain that swallowed all thought. I didn't land directly on the concrete. My trajectory was thankfully altered by a strategically placed, overflowing dumpster, a silver lining to Mark's disastrous decision to choose this specific hiding spot. The force of the fall was absorbed by a mountain of sodden cardboard and old furniture, but the jolt still rattled every tooth in my head. For a moment, I was suspended in nothingness, listening only to the ringing in my ears, which sounded suspiciously like a distant, insistent alarm. Then the noise resolved itself into the unmistakable sound of official vehicles. Not just the police, but heavy-duty vehicles whose engines idled with a deep, menacing rumble. The blue and red lights Mark had seen from the balcony were now sweeping across the alley walls, painting the garbage bins in frantic strokes of color. I lay perfectly still, conserving the meager oxygen my bruised lungs could manage. The paper, the vital, terrible piece of paper, was still crushed in my right hand, its edges now damp with my own sweat, and something warmer that I didn't want to identify. Above me, on the fire escape, chaos erupted. I heard Mark's frantic shout, no longer whispered, but raw panic. "They're here! They've found us! The perimeter is blown!" Then came the sound of breaking glass from one of the lower windows, a sign that whoever these external operatives were, they were not bothering with doors. Simultaneously, I heard Clara's terrified scream from high above, followed by a sharp, dull thud, as if she'd been struck or shoved. "Clara!" I tried to call out, but the sound that emerged was a choked, useless croak. Mark, realizing the situation was collapsing, must have made a desperate decision. I heard heavy footfalls pounding down the metal stairs, not the hesitant steps of someone climbing down, but the aggressive descent of someone fleeing. He was coming down the fire escape, and he was coming fast. I had to hide the paper. If Mark got his hands on it, or if the approaching service found me with it, I'd be caught in the crossfire of something far beyond my comprehension. I jammed the folded paper deep into the waistband of my trousers, tucking it under the torn fabric of my shirt, praying it wouldn't be noticed during a cursory search. The thudding steps grew louder, closer. I forced myself into a fetal position, trying to mimic a discarded piece of debris, even as the adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind a vast, throbbing ache. Mark burst into the alleyway, not looking down, heading straight for the main street. He was sprinting, carrying the bulky black pouch like a lifeline. He didn't even glance toward the dumpster where I lay. He was focused entirely on escape. But he wasn't alone. As Mark cleared the edge of the dumpster alcove, two figures emerged from the shadows near the Main Street entrance. They weren't wearing standard police uniforms. They wore dark tactical gear, helmets obscuring their faces, body armor visible even in the flashing lights. They moved with a silent, practiced coordination that screamed professionalism. These were the people Mark had referred to as the service. "Halt! Identify!" one of the figures commanded, his voice distorted slightly by a radio headset. Mark didn't stop. He raised the black pouch defensively, an absurd gesture. The response was immediate and shocking in its finality. There was a sharp, heavy sound, not a firearm discharge, but something flatter, more blunt. Mark staggered, dropping the pouch, which skidded across the pavement, the contents spilling out. Bundles of foreign cash mixed with what looked alarmingly like highly sensitive electronic components. Mark crumpled, seizing up on the ground. The first operative didn't even look at Mark again. His partner immediately knelt by the fallen pouch, swiftly gathering the scattered materials. The first operative, however, turned his attention toward the only other source of movement in the alley: me. He approached the dumpster slowly, his own weapon, a compact, silenced firearm, now raised and aimed directly at my head. The helmet visor reflected the flashing blue and red lights, making his face an impassive, terrifying void. "Identify yourself," the voice repeated, this time devoid of inflection, purely transactional. "Why are you concealed near the compromised asset?" My body refused to cooperate. I could only manage a pathetic whimper. "Family. Brother-in-law." The operative paused, assessing. He could see my torn clothes, the visible bruises already blooming purple on my skin, and the clear evidence that I had just taken a massive fall. He didn't seem convinced, but perhaps the fact that I was clearly injured and non-threatening changed the calculus. He stepped closer, scanning my body. His gaze lingered for a fraction of a second on my waistline, where the paper was tucked. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden silence that had fallen after Mark went down. The operative didn't reach for the paper. Instead, he used the muzzle of his weapon to gently nudge the lump of my bruised ribs, eliciting a sharp intake of breath from me. "You are an undocumented witness," he stated flatly. "The situation is now under the control of the Bureau for Financial Security." He paused, then added a chilling directive into his headset. "Sweep confirmed. Asset MRK neutralized. One collateral witness found injured near the primary containment zone. Recommend immediate extraction for interview and assessment of operational compromise." My mind reeled. Financial Security Bureau? They had taken Mark out like a piece of faulty wiring, and now I was the collateral witness slated for extraction, a word that sounded far too clean for what I suspected actually meant abduction. Just as the second operative finished securing the last of Mark's evidence, a new sound cut through the night, the distinct, heavy whirring of a helicopter overhead, descending rapidly. The first operative straightened up, his attention snapping skyward. "Command, we have airborne intrusion. Prepare for immediate relocation." He looked back at me, his expression unreadable behind the visor. "You're coming with us. Cooperate, and you might see the sunrise." He didn't wait for my response. He reached down, not for the paper, but to haul me roughly to my feet using the good arm that I hadn't completely broken. The pain flared again, threatening to send me back to the ground. I swayed precariously, barely able to stand, leaning heavily against the cold metal of the dumpster. As they began to half-drag, half-carry me toward the main street, away from the fire escape and any chance of seeing Clara, I felt a sudden, terrifying loosening in my trousers. The paper, dislodged by the rough handling, had slipped downward. It wasn't completely out, but a corner of the stark white paper was now visibly peeking out from under my belt line, catching the harsh sweep of the approaching helicopter's searchlight. The operative supporting my weight froze instantly. His head snapped down, following my gaze to the exposed corner of the document. He didn't need to see the full text. He recognized the paper itself. His grip tightened painfully around my bicep, and his other hand flew to his radio. "Abort extraction. Command, we have an unauthorized document breach. The witness has physical evidence that compromises the Taushkoye Obvinenia data stream. Repeat, the data stream is compromised. We need immediate lockdown." He wrenched me around, pulling me away from the street and back toward the relative darkness of the alley, his partner abandoning the recovered pouch to join him. I could feel the helicopter blades whipping the air violently above us, the downdraft threatening to rip us off our feet. They weren't taking me for an interview anymore. They were taking me to silence me, before I could reveal what was on that paper. Whatever data stream involved a severe charge. And as they shoved me deeper into the shadows, I saw, for just a horrifying instant, a figure silhouetted against the light spilling from the third-floor balcony. Clara, peering down at the escalating disaster, her face pale with terror, watching them drag me away. The sheer speed of the operatives was terrifying. They weren't guiding me, they were moving me like a piece of evidence that had just become contaminated. The operative who had spotted the paper, I now mentally labeled him Hunter, had lost all pretense of calm interrogation. His movements were sharp, economical, and utterly ruthless. He dragged me toward a heavy, unmarked black van, parked partially obscured behind a utility shed, the engine already idling, its doors slightly ajar. "Don't look up, don't talk, and for God's sake, don't move that paper," Hunter hissed into his headset, shoving me against the cold metal flank of the van. His partner, Enforcer, was already inside, monitoring the radio traffic with his own device. My vision swam. The pain in my ribs was immense, making every breath a conscious, agonizing battle. But the adrenaline surge from the near discovery of the paper was even stronger. I knew, with chilling certainty, that if I let them take me to wherever extraction meant, I would never see the light of day again, and the truth about Mark's entanglement would die with me. I had to distract them. I had to create a gap large enough for me to leverage the only weapon I had left. Utter desperation. As Hunter wrestled me toward the open sliding door of the van, I executed the only maneuver my broken body could manage. Instead of falling, I buckled my knees, wrenching my body sideways with the last vestiges of my strength, aiming my entire weight away from him and toward the dumpster, using the momentum from his own pull against him. Hunter was strong, but he was also focused on securing the evidence, the visible corner of the paper, which was still tucked precariously into my waistband. "Hold still, civilian," he barked. I didn't. I twisted hard, my torn shirt snagging on a sharp piece of metal protruding from the dumpster's frame. I heard a satisfying rip as the fabric tore further, but more importantly, I felt the slight, glorious shift of the paper sliding free. It fluttered for an agonizing second in the wind generated by the descending helicopter, a stark white flag in the dark alley, before landing softly on a flattened pile of wet newspaper near the Enforcer's boots. Hunter saw it happen an instant too late. He looked from the paper on the ground to my face, his eyes, visible through a gap in his helmet visor, flashing with sheer fury at the contamination of the scene. The rule was clearly absolute. No outside evidence allowed. "The document," Hunter yelled, momentarily abandoning me to lunge for the paper. This was it. I scrambled on all fours, ignoring the excruciating protest of my ribs, clawing toward the van's open door, hoping to get inside before they regained focus. If I could reach the driver's side, if I could somehow start this machine, I might escape. I hurled myself into the cavernous, dark interior of the van just as Enforcer pivoted, realizing I was making a break for the controls. He didn't shoot. He moved to intercept, a massive shape blocking the path to the driver's seat. "He's trying to take the vehicle," Enforcer shouted into his radio, drawing a secondary weapon, a heavy baton. I dove left, rolling under the center console where the equipment racks were housed. The impact with the metal housing sent a fresh wave of nausea through me, but I was low, out of the immediate reach of the baton. I blindly grabbed for anything that looked like a release mechanism or a key fob. My hand closed around something hard and metallic, a small electronic fob attached to a thick lanyard. I heard Hunter barking orders outside, his voice tight with frustration. "Forget the paper for now. Contain the witness. If he saw Mark's transmission log, he's too hot to leave here." Suddenly, the entire vehicle jolted violently. Enforcer hadn't been aiming for me. He'd been aiming for the area around me. He had slammed the van's main battery compartment cover, hoping to incapacitate me with a shock or at least stun me. The movement, however, had dislodged the FOB I was holding. It slid across the metal floor, coming to rest near the rear loading area. Before I could reach it, the sliding side door, the one leading to the alley, slammed shut with a pneumatic thud, plunging the rear compartment into absolute darkness again. Enforcer had sealed the door, intending to trap me until Hunter could deal with the initial breach evidence. I was sealed inside a windowless, dark metal box with a heavily armed operative who was already focused on eliminating me. "You're done, civilian," Enforcer's voice echoed, dangerously close to my hiding spot under the console. I could hear the click as he prepared the baton. I knew I couldn't fight him. I needed chaos, and I needed to find that key fob. I strained my neck, peering through the gloom toward where I last saw the small metal object slide. My hand groped wildly in the dark, brushing against wires, plastic containers, and cold metal shelving. My fingers finally closed around the smooth, hard plastic of the FOB. I snatched it up and without thinking jammed its strange, oddly shaped end into the nearest accessible port I could feel, a thick, rubber-sealed socket labeled only with a faded Cyrillic symbol near the floor. There was no sound, no jolt of electricity. Instead, the entire internal environment of the van changed. The air, which had been stale and metallic, suddenly began to churn with a high-pitched whine. Then a series of bright, intensely focused spotlights snapped on, not pointing out the windows, but angled directly downward inside the cargo bay. They illuminated Enforcer, bathing him in blinding white light, freezing him mid-motion. He roared, throwing his arms up to shield his eyes. "What the hell is this override? I can't see!" Hunter, still outside, must have seen the sudden internal illumination. "Enforcer, report! What's happening in there? Is that the secondary encryption system booting up?" I didn't know if I had just activated a weapon, an alarm, or the coffee maker, but it was working. While Enforcer was temporarily blinded, I scrambled backward away from the blinding lights toward the rear doors. If I could get those open, I could use the noise and light as cover to bolt into the night. I located the heavy manual release handle for the rear doors. My fingers wrapped around the cold steel lever. I pulled with every ounce of remaining strength. The lever moved, but instead of the doors flying open, a small, heavily shielded panel next to the handle slid away with a quiet pneumatic hiss, revealing a digital keypad beneath. And next to that keypad, flashing a terrifying, urgent red, was a countdown timer. It had already started, initiated by the device I had just jammed into the system. Hunter's voice, panicked now, came through the external speaker system attached to the van's communication array. "Enforcer, that's the failsafe sequence. Get him away from that panel. If that sequence completes, the entire mobile unit self-destructs to prevent compromise of the encrypted drive." The 3-digit countdown glowed red, mocking my frantic struggle. 0, 0, 1, 15. Self-destruct. The consequence of inserting the wrong key into the wrong slot in a highly secured vehicle belonging to an unknown, heavily armed branch of some national security apparatus was apparently instant vaporization. Enforcer, still reeling from the sudden internal lighting, was staggering blindly toward the console, roaring obscenities that were lost under the mounting whine of the power systems. Hunter, outside, was screaming into his comms, the urgency confirming that whatever this vehicle contained, the encrypted drive, was infinitely more valuable than my life, or even Mark's. I knew I couldn't fight Enforcer, and I certainly couldn't outrun Hunter. My only hope lay in the one piece of evidence I still possessed, the paper tucked against my ribs. If the Bureau for Financial Security was reacting this violently to the threat of compromise, perhaps revealing the actual evidence could buy me time, or at least point me toward an ally. Ignoring the burning agony in my side and the searing glare of the internal floodlights, I ripped the paper from my waistband. It was only a small slip, slightly crumpled, but as I held it up, the bright light illuminated the dense, handwritten text. It wasn't a financial ledger. It was a series of highly specific coordinates, marked with dates that matched the current week, and a single, cryptic notation in the margin. Handover Protocol Gamma 9. Assets transferred to primary director only. I didn't understand the coordinates, but I understood the implication. Mark wasn't just a facilitator for a criminal network. He was involved in something bureaucratic, high-level, and state-sanctioned, or perhaps a rogue element operating under a thin veneer of official legitimacy, which explained the Bureau for Financial Security response 00:00:45. Enforcer was close enough now that I could hear his heavy breathing over the whine. He swung the heavy baton in a wide arc, aiming to sweep me out from under the console. I had to make a gamble. I lunged upward, not away from him, but directly toward the exposed keypad panel, sacrificing any defense. "Stop!" I screamed, my voice raw, finally breaching the professional clamor of the operatives. I held the coordinates up directly into the intense floodlight beam, maximizing visibility. "I know about Gamma 9. I have the coordinates." The effect was immediate. Enforcer froze, his swing arrested midair. The baton hung inches from my face. The noise from the external speaker cut off abruptly. Hunter's voice came through, now startlingly calm, cutting through the electronic screeching. "Enforcer, stand down. Do not engage the witness. Secure the perimeter. Reroute all comms to Emergency Channel 1. Repeat, stand down." Enforcer slowly lowered the baton, his massive silhouette momentarily obscured by the sudden stop of the internal lights as the system stabilized itself away from the self-destruct sequence. He stared at me, his eyes still adjusting, clearly awaiting new orders. "The timer?" I managed, my voice barely a whisper. "Deactivated," Hunter replied smoothly through the speaker. "The system recognized the protocol marker. You must have stumbled upon a decryption key, civilian. Impressive, given your apparent condition." They had stopped trying to subdue me violently. They needed the information I held, and destroying the evidence along with me was no longer the priority. 0 hours, 0 minutes, 5 seconds. The countdown was gone, replaced by a steady, ominous green light on the keypad. Hunter opened the side door himself, stepping inside the van, his helmet retracting slightly to reveal a tired, middle-aged face etched with stress. He looked more like an accountant than a tactical operative. "You are Alex. Your sister, Clara, is safe. She is being held separately for questioning regarding her brother's association with compromised assets. You are now the primary source of intelligence regarding the Gamma 9 protocol breach. You have 3 options," he stated, his tone shifting from aggressive to coldly professional. "Option 1, you hand over that note and we treat you as a person of interest. You testify to everything we tell you to, and you might walk away with a very lengthy NDA and a new identity. Option 2, he continued, gesturing to the inert encryption device on the counter, you attempt to interfere further, and we will detain you indefinitely under charges relating to conspiracy involving organized schemes and obstructing federal inquiry. That means the Ogromny Srok is on the table." My mind raced. New identity? NDA? They wanted to erase me. But I had Clara. She was alive, for now, in the hands of these Bureau agents. "And option 3, I asked, forcing my voice steady despite the throbbing in my side. Hunter gave a thin, humorless smile. Option 3 is the one I suspect you'll take, given your current predicament. You are injured, compromised, and you have direct evidence that implicates individuals far higher up than my team. You cooperate fully, you tell us everything about Mark's final movements, who he was reporting to, not just the coordinates, but the name he used, and in return, we ensure Clara walks away with no charges, and you walk away with a clean bill of health and a promise that your apartment complex will, coincidentally, be sold to a very quiet, very reputable management firm by morning. I looked down at the paper in my hand. The key to surviving this nightmare was leveraging the danger Mark had introduced. I had the only leverage they recognized: exposed information. Gamma 9 required the primary director's signature for execution, I said, ignoring the sting of the words. Mark didn't mention a name, but he said the handover was set for dawn. Dawn is in an hour. The coordinates lead to the old city archive building downtown. Tell me where Clara is, specifically, and I'll tell you everything about what Mark was preparing to give up, including the name associated with that signature. Hunter's eyes widened slightly. I had called his bluff on the coordinates. He stared at me for a long, tense moment, the flashing red lights of the city reflecting in his eyes. He keyed his radio one last time. "Command, update. Witness Alex has provided actionable intelligence regarding Gamma 9 target location, requesting immediate transfer of collateral, Clara N, to neutral holding zone for evidence exchange." He lowered the mic, fixed me with an intense gaze, and nodded once. "The coordinates are correct. You've bought yourself and your wife a small window, Alex. Don't waste it." He pointed toward the driver's seat where the key fob now rested, blinking green. "Drive. You get to the archive building and we will exchange Clara for the full details, right there on neutral ground." I felt a surge of terrified adrenaline. I was being handed the keys to a volatile situation, forced to drive directly into the heart of the storm Mark had started. I reached for the ignition, my trembling fingers gripping the wheel of the unmarked black van, the headlights illuminating the empty, echoing alleyway. I was trading one cage for another, but at least this time I was in control of the direction. I looked back toward the window where I'd last seen Clara. She was gone. The only thing left was the cold reality of the road ahead, and the knowledge that Mark's betrayal had just landed me squarely in the crosshairs of forces I couldn't even name.